Hey guys, today I'll show you a science fiction thriller TV series named Almost Human. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins in a futuristic world where the police deploy high techs to combat crimes. A police officer named John is once the most elite detective in the force, but 2 years ago, during an operation, he was ambushed, his best friend was blown up on the spot, and his M-type robot partner suggested that John should immediately retreat. The robot even abandoned him based on probability calculations, leading to John losing a leg in the explosion. He spent 2 years recovering in the hospital, and during that time, his girlfriend also left him. Although technology is now advanced enough to equip John with a mechanical leg, the resentment in his heart never faded. So when his superior assigned him a new M-type robot again, the first thing John did was find an excuse to destroy it. That was the last one in stock. With no other choice, his superior assigned him a decommissioned D-type robot. Unlike the specialized M-type, the D-type was designed for balanced performance. It had a wider range of skills, but wasn't as proficient in specific areas. However, that wasn't the reason it was discontinued. The real reason was that during development, it was equipped with a synthetic soul feature, which allowed it to better understand human emotions. But later models, like the upgraded X-type, showed instability, sometimes even developing violent tendencies. The company producing both models ultimately went bankrupt. Now, only one D-type robot remained in the police force, whose name is Dorian. John didn't like him, but according to regulations, they had to work together. Before long, John was assigned a case. Surveillance footage showed that a fellow officer had been ambushed by a mysterious group in a parking lot. Oddly, after kidnapping the officer, the perpetrators deliberately left one of their own behind, as if they wanted the police to capture him. This was a blatant provocation. John intended to teach them a lesson. Dorian, as if reading his mind, shut the interrogation room window, but to John's surprise, the captive was extremely tight-lipped. No matter what methods they used, he refused to talk. Just as John was about to give up, Dorian took over. He was even more ruthless than John. He prepared to shoot the man on the spot. Seeing this, the captive immediately cracked and provided an address. Although John had no idea what the criminals were planning, he led a team to the location. The moment they entered, they were greeted with a gift, a mysterious device. Everyone hesitated, fearing it was a bomb, and planned to call in a bomb disposal unit. But Dorian quickly analyzed it and declared that it wasn't an explosive. John cautiously inspected it and confirmed it was, in fact, a specialized launch device. The countdown timer on the device was fake. Any attempt to tamper with it would trigger activation, so John and his team ignored it. However, they failed to notice a secondary mechanism. As they worked to free a hostage, they realized that a wire connected the hostage to the device. When the countdown ended, the wire was severed, releasing a gas that instantly corroded the hostage's skin, killing them in seconds. John was horrified. Every officer had undergone enhancements to be immune to most toxins and corrosives. Even strong acids couldn't harm them. But this gas was specifically designed to target police officers. Realizing the danger, John immediately reported it to his superior, but it was too late. A plane was already hovering above the police station. Dozens of mysterious figures descended, carrying advanced equipment. It was clear they were planning something big. Meanwhile, the captive they had detained took advantage of a bathroom break to retrieve a small device hidden inside his body. He discreetly installed it in the building's ventilation system. Everything was falling into place. Soon, the criminals on the rooftop activated their devices, and the planted equipment in the ventilation system came online. Within moments, they had taken control of the entire building's airflow. The police officers inside were unaware of what was happening until they started collapsing like wheat in a field. By the time John rushed back, nearly everyone had already fallen. Fortunately, John had spent 2 years in the hospital. His body modifications were slightly different, making him resistant. Dorian, being an outdated D-type, was also unaffected. John sprinted toward the rooftop. The criminals noticed his approach and immediately opened fire, while simultaneously rushing to pack up their equipment and evacuate. Escaping wasn't going to be that easy. Dorian locked onto one of the criminals and casually walked up to him, unfazed by the hail of bullets. The criminal sprayed Dorian with a toxic gas, but it had no effect. Confused as to why, the criminal was left with no choice but to spend the rest of his life contemplating it behind bars. Later, an investigation revealed that the true target of the heist was a chip stored in the evidence room, the last remaining synthetic soul. All the others had been destroyed along with the collapse of the company that created them. By sheer coincidence, John had managed to thwart a plan that could have led to global destruction. Following this incident, John was assigned a new case. A high-ranking executive from a robotics company had been murdered. At first glance, this seemed like a routine case, but the surveillance footage suggested otherwise. The perpetrators were unlike anything John had ever seen. Two humanoid figures with glowing bulb-like heads. More puzzlingly, the DNA bomb they left behind contained the biological data of countless individuals, contaminating all traces of forensic evidence at the crime scene. Their true identities remained unknown, but what was even more baffling was their motive. Surveillance footage showed that the two assailants had abducted a beautiful woman from the scene. From Dorian's observations, it was clear that she was a companion robot. However, there were no records of her in the police database. A strange coincidence soon surfaced. The victim was a senior executive of a high-end companion robot company, and just before his death, his assets had been seized. Sensing a potential connection, John and Dorian headed to the confiscated property warehouse, hoping to find some clues. However, aside from a pile of court subpoenas, they found nothing. Just then, John received an urgent message from his colleagues at the station. Fingerprint analysis of the abducted woman had revealed human DNA. Even more shockingly, the identity matched that of a woman who had been reported missing. Stranger still, her disappearance occurred on the same day the murdered executive's assets were seized. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, another victim had been discovered. The crime scene bore an eerie resemblance to the previous abduction. But this time, the criminals had overlooked something: a child hidden inside the car. As the only witness so far, John needed to question him. However, the boy was deeply traumatized by what he had seen and refused to speak. In the end, John used a toy giraffe to break through the child's emotional wall. Slowly, the boy opened up, revealing that there had been two kidnappers who had fled in a silver van. The police quickly launched an investigation and identified a suspect vehicle. However, there was a complication. It appeared to be using fake plates, meaning further verification was required. In the meantime, John decided to follow another lead: the court subpoenas. A deep dive into the case files revealed that the victim's business partner had filed a lawsuit against him. This was intriguing, especially since the partner had seemingly emerged from the incident completely unscathed and was even hosting exhibitions across the country. Determined to investigate further, John and Dorian paid a visit to this business partner. When questioned, the man answered without hesitation. He explained that he and the victim had fallen out due to disagreements over the company's direction, leading to their eventual split. Afterward, the board of investors had sided with this man, which was why his business remained relatively unaffected. However, when pressed for details about their dispute, the man became vague, citing corporate confidentiality. This raised John's suspicions. Sensing something was off, he instructed Dorian to hack into the man's internal network. Soon, they uncovered a key piece of information. The company was secretly backed by an Albanian financial conglomerate. Conveniently, this conglomerate operated a nightclub nearby. Suspecting a connection, John and Dorian decided to investigate. Sure enough, they found evidence that something was amiss. The club's manager insisted that he knew nothing, but Dorian's sensors detected clear signs that he was lying. Just as John was about to press for more information, his colleague, Anna, suddenly sent an urgent message. The silver van had been found. Without hesitation, John and Dorian rushed to the location, an abandoned factory in a remote area. Inside, they discovered the companion robot, but its synthetic skin had been completely stripped away. After a professional examination by the forensic expert, they confirmed that the robot's data storage center had been utterly destroyed, leaving almost no leads. Fortunately, there was a breakthrough. Human DNA was found within the remains of the robot. This was a clear violation of the law. Based on the available information, John speculated that the kidnappers had been abducting women to create sex robots, and this had likely caused a rift between Shaw and the deceased executive, ultimately leading to a lawsuit and possibly murder. The theory made perfect sense. Just then, another sighting of the silver van was reported. John immediately led a team to intercept it. They managed to stop the vehicle en route, arresting the driver and others on the spot. Upon inspection, they discovered another female sex robot inside. Forensic analysis revealed something shocking. This robot also contained human DNA and matched the profile of a missing woman. At this point, the case was becoming increasingly clear. The final piece came when the captured sex robot revealed that she had been following orders from a nightclub manager. Without wasting time, John led a team to make the arrest. However, it seemed the suspect had anticipated exposure. By the time they arrived, the nightclub manager had already vanished. A thorough search of the premises led to another discovery, a collection of specialized chips used in robot manufacturing. Dorian identified the chip type and activated it, revealing location records. Using this data, the police successfully pinpointed the secret robot manufacturing facility. When John arrived, he caught the nightclub manager in the act of destroying evidence. With no way to escape, the suspect was arrested red-handed. With the case finally closed, John allowed himself a rare moment of relaxation. Dorian, ever the teaser, suggested he should get a sex robot for himself. After all, during the mission, Dorian had secretly scanned John's physical stats. Hearing this, John sternly warned him not to scan his smelly privates. Since that incident, John had remained caught up in an endless workload. Just recently, a group of armed criminals had stormed a high-rise building, shooting security personnel and taking numerous hostages. Coincidentally, John was in the vicinity and rushed to the scene immediately. Reviewing the building's security footage, he identified the suspect's location on the 25th floor. The group was large in number, making a direct assault risky. As John coordinated reinforcements, he and Dorian stealthily infiltrated the building, waiting for the right moment to act. Soon, a large police force surrounded the building. However, the criminals remained unnervingly calm. From their conversations, it was clear this was exactly the outcome they had planned for. The next moment, an explosion rocked the building. The criminals had planted bombs inside and were ready to detonate them at any moment if the police got too close. With such a situation unfolding, the authorities had no choice but to hold back. Moreover, they couldn't be certain if more explosives were hidden inside. To counter the threat, the police decided to jam all signals in the area, preventing the criminals from remotely detonating the bombs. However, this also meant that John, who had infiltrated the building alone, was now in extreme danger. Despite his colleagues' warnings, he insisted on pressing forward. From his position on the 24th floor, he carefully observed the situation above. His team knew they couldn't change his mind, so they could only wish him luck. Once the signal jamming devices were activated, all communications within a 5-kilometer radius were cut off. Suddenly, Dorian was flooded with incoming calls. It was an emergency protocol redirecting all local distress calls to him. Among them was one particularly unusual call. It was from an employee trapped on the 25th floor. Through their conversation, John was able to gather key details about the criminals' numbers and reactions. Surprisingly, they weren't the least bit alarmed by the signal blackout. In fact, it seemed like cutting off communication had been their goal all along. This puzzled John. At that moment, the criminals executed a hostage and threw the body out of the window. The police immediately initiated negotiations, using a drone to deliver a communication device to the suspects. The criminals laid out their demands. First, they wanted the police to maintain their distance. That was manageable. But their second demand was near impossible. They wanted a nuclear fission initiator, giving the police a strict 40-minute deadline. For every minute past the limit, another hostage would die. The first demand could be met, but the second was a nightmare. A nuclear fission initiator was a military-grade device. Getting approval was unfeasible, let alone delivering it within the time frame. If the criminals started killing hostages en masse, the police leadership would take the fall for it. At this moment, the forensic expert chimed in with an idea. Although his official role was that of a coroner, his true passion lay in chemistry, physics, and occasional inventing. If anyone could come up with a solution, it was him. Although the forensic expert couldn't create a real nuclear fission initiator, he could build something that looked nearly identical. As long as it wasn't used on the spot, no one would be able to tell the difference. With his expertise, a fake initiator was swiftly assembled and delivered to the criminals just in time. However, the gang leader casually tossed it onto the table, showing little interest in it. During this distraction, John silently took down one of the criminals. Meanwhile, Dorian scanned the suspects and confirmed that they belonged to a terrorist organization previously involved in attacks in Japan. Despite the police meeting their demands, the criminals did not harm the hostages. Just as John began to relax slightly, the leader's face began to distort. Only then did they realize he had been using a facial disguise device. His true identity was linked to a notorious robbery gang with multiple past offenses. Realizing this, John immediately sensed something was wrong. The real target wasn't the high-rise building they had infiltrated. As if to confirm his suspicion, the criminals on the 25th floor contacted their accomplices elsewhere, signaling them to proceed with the plan. Dorian, who had been secretly listening in on their conversation, quickly pinpointed their actual objective. Not far from the high-rise was a precious metals company storing large quantities of metal sheets. Across the street, a separate team of armed men had been waiting for the signal. The moment it came through, they launched an attack, raiding the warehouse storing palladium. Their plan was to escape while their allies in the high-rise created chaos as a diversion. Meanwhile, the criminals in the building planted explosives on the 25th floor, intending to eliminate all hostages and erase any traces. However, their plan had already been exposed. Knowing that storming the stairwell was not an option, Dorian took an alternative route, descending through an inactive elevator shaft. The criminals never expected someone to enter from there, catching them off guard. However, sheer numbers soon overwhelmed him. The moment they regrouped, Dorian was instantly suppressed by enemy fire and was on the verge of being completely destroyed. Just then, John stepped forward. Using a facial disguise device confiscated earlier, he had slipped into the group amidst the chaos caused by Dorian. Seizing the opportunity, he swiftly eliminated the remaining criminals. Dorian immediately deactivated the bombs, while John notified his superior about the criminals' true identities and their larger scheme. Upon learning the truth, the superior promptly ordered the signal jammer to be shut down. Almost simultaneously, the alarm in the Palladium warehouse blared to life. The criminals inside, caught off guard, found themselves trapped as the vault doors locked shut. With their escape route sealed, the entire gang was captured. John and Dorian's exceptional performance earned praise from the entire police force, and many began to reconsider their previous doubts about outdated D-type robots. Not long after, John received a new assignment. A renowned geneticist had been brutally murdered by his own employer, Ethan, in an underground parking lot. With 2 witnesses at the scene, the evidence was overwhelming, and Ethan was immediately arrested. To ensure the witnesses' safety, the police arranged for them to stay in a secure safe house. During the trial, they would testify remotely via holographic projection, eliminating the need for their physical presence in court. However, on the day of the trial, something unexpected happened. While one of the witnesses was testifying via projection, they appeared to be attacked mid-sentence. Although the projection couldn't capture the assailant's face, the victim's desperate cries identified the attacker as Ethan himself. But that was impossible. Ethan was present in the courtroom at that very moment. The revelation left everyone deeply unsettled. The police immediately rushed to the safe house, only to find that both the stationed M-type security robot and the human officers had been killed. One of the witnesses had also been murdered. Now, all hope rested on the sole survivor. A thorough search led to the discovery of the remaining witness, who had managed to escape. Shaken but alive, she recounted what had happened. While in the bathroom, she heard sounds of struggle outside. Realizing something was wrong, she fled through the window and ran into the nearby forest, barely evading the attacker. Meanwhile, investigators found a tracking chip embedded in the victim's body. It was likely how the attacker had located the safe house. However, this still didn't explain how Ethan, who was physically in court, could have attacked them. At this point, the remaining witness hesitantly offered a suggestion. Claiming to be a medium, she insisted she could communicate with the deceased to uncover the truth. John, a firm skeptic, dismissed the idea outright. Fortunately, the forensic expert had gathered concrete evidence from the crime scene. His analysis of security footage and audio recordings revealed something chilling. The attacker's voice was an exact match for Ethan's. This revelation left John and his superior grim-faced. If the findings were accurate, there was only one possible explanation. It's a clone. However, cloning technology had been banned for years, with all related research and data eradicated long ago. Even so, Anna suggested it was still a possibility. After all, cloning was simply an extension of genetic science, and the murdered victim happened to be a geneticist. Perhaps he had succeeded in his experiments, only to be silenced for it. Acting on this theory, the superior ordered Anna to investigate the victim's home, hoping to uncover crucial evidence that could expose the truth. As for John, his superior hadn't even had time to assign him a task when news broke that the remaining witness had disappeared. As a key witness, every move she made was closely monitored. John immediately set out to search for her and finally found her after much effort. Furious, he demanded to know why she had snuck out of police custody. Looking somewhat guilty, the witness explained that she had communicated with the spirit of her deceased companion and had left to deliver their final message to the victim's family. Just as they were talking, a car suddenly pulled up in front of them. 4 men stepped out, and before John could even question their intentions, they opened fire. A fierce gunfight erupted. During the exchange, the witness was hit in the shoulder by a bullet, while one of the masked attackers was killed. Realizing the situation was turning against them, the remaining 3 quickly jumped back into the car and fled. Upon examining the body of the fallen attacker, John made a shocking discovery. The man was identical to Ethan. This confirmed his suspicion. Clones were indeed behind the crimes, but that also meant Anna, who had gone to investigate, was in danger. At the geneticist's residence, Anna found a letter detailing how Ethan had funded cloning research and how tensions had eventually escalated between the two. She instructed her robotic partner to send the contents to the police station while she continued searching for more clues. However, when she returned, she found her robot destroyed and an Ethan clone slowly approaching her. Unaware that multiple clones existed, Anna was caught off guard and ambushed by two more clones who captured her. Using Anna as leverage, the clones called the police, demanding the release of the real Ethan. The superior, while appearing to agree to their demands, was merely stalling for time. John and his team arrived at the designated meeting spot, with Ethan under the superior's control, slowly walking toward the clones. But just then, a flock of birds flew overhead, and in that instant, Ethan and the superior's figures distorted. The truth was revealed. The real Ethan had never left prison. He had merely been walking in circles inside a hallway which was surrounded by projection equipment, creating the illusion of his presence. Realizing they had been deceived, the clones immediately opened fire on John's team. But this time, the police were prepared. The clones, despite their human strength, were no match for the heavily armed robots. One clone attempted to escape by car but was swiftly apprehended. With Anna safely rescued, the mastermind behind it all, Ethan, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, peace didn't last long. Just a few days later, John received a new case. According to the report, an armed man had stormed into a hospital. He wasn't there to rob anyone. He simply demanded immediate surgery, all the while mumbling incoherent phrases. Though the doctors couldn't understand what he was saying, they proceeded to have a nurse assist him. But before anything could be done, the man suddenly collapsed. Using his last ounce of strength, he warned the doctors that someone was trying to kill him, then he died. A subsequent examination revealed that he had succumbed to heart failure. His bizarre death immediately caught the attention of the police, and John was assigned to investigate. But as soon as he began digging, the case took an even stranger turn. The first mystery was the man's identity. He had been diagnosed with terminal heart failure 3 years ago, yet here he was, showing up at the hospital alive before dying in front of the doctors. A scan of his body revealed the second anomaly. His heart was artificial. Not only was it an incredibly expensive synthetic organ, but every unit of its kind was supposed to be officially registered. Yet this man had no record of ever receiving one. This strongly suggested that he had undergone an illegal heart transplant via the black market. That would explain how he had managed to survive all these years, but it also pointed to a much bigger crime, the trafficking of synthetic organs. Additionally, by analyzing hospital surveillance footage, Dorian was able to decipher what the dying man had been saying. Shockingly, he had known the exact moment of his own death. This raised an even more alarming question. Was his artificial heart somehow connected to his premonition? With that in mind, they sent the synthetic heart to the police lab for analysis, entrusting the forensic expert with the investigation. At the same time, they began looking into the man's family, hoping to uncover more clues. Before long, both leads yielded major breakthroughs. First, the forensic expert confirmed that the synthetic heart was manufactured by a well-known artificial organ company. However, he also discovered something unusual, a mysterious chip embedded within it. Its function remained unknown. Meanwhile, Anna, after speaking with the deceased man's mother, learned that he had indeed undergone an underground heart transplant 3 years prior. She even provided a photograph of the location where the surgery had taken place. Unfortunately, that lead was a dead end. The site had long since been demolished. With no other immediate trails to follow, the only remaining clue was the artificial organ company. John and his team arrived at the organ company, where the person in charge informed them that the synthetic heart originally belonged to a woman who had died 3 years ago. The suspicious timing immediately put John on high alert. He pressed for details about how the body and organs had been handled. The company representative stated that all remains were destroyed by specialized personnel. Still unconvinced, John asked for proof of their disposal. By this point, John had a strong suspicion about the source of the organs. He tracked down the man responsible for their destruction. The moment John flashed his police badge, the man crumbled under pressure and confessed everything. He admitted to smuggling the synthetic organs of the deceased, though he insisted that his intention was to help those in need. But explanations were meaningless now. John ordered him to contact the buyers under the pretense of arranging a new deal that night. Unaware that he was walking into a trap, the organ trafficker showed up for the transaction. John and his team tailed him straight to his base, where they took down the entire operation in one sweep. It seemed like the case had come to a close. However, during interrogation, the captured organ trafficker revealed something unexpected. He had a superior. He claimed that everything he did was under the orders of a woman, though he didn't know any further details. Around the same time, reports flooded in of sudden deaths occurring all over the city. Every victim had suffered heart failure, and all of them had been implanted with the same type of synthetic heart. That's when John realized the real mastermind was still at large, and his previous actions had inadvertently alerted them. Meanwhile, the forensic expert made a breakthrough in his investigation. The mysterious chip inside the synthetic hearts was confirmed to be a countdown mechanism. Every month, it required a signal reset. If it didn't receive one, the heart would stop beating. This explained the wave of simultaneous deaths. Now, their only option was to track down the person behind it before more lives were lost. Upon reviewing the victims' records, John discovered a chilling pattern. Every single one of them had applied for an organ transplant at the same company and had been rejected. It was highly likely that the mastermind had been selecting targets from the rejection list. Armed with this theory, John returned to the organ company and demanded to know who had access to the list. The manager revealed that only she and her assistant had seen it. John and his team then showed the organ trafficker photos of the two. Without hesitation, he identified the assistant as his boss. With this solid lead, John and his team rushed to the assistant's residence, only to find it abandoned. A closer examination revealed something even more disturbing: traces of cleaned-up blood on the floor. It was highly likely that the assistant had been silenced. The method used to cover up the crime was meticulous and professional, clearly the work of someone accustomed to handling corpses. John immediately thought of the man responsible for the organ product's destruction. They hurried to his location, and sure enough, they found the assistant's body being disposed of in one of the destruction units. Realizing he had been caught, the man made a run for it, but John quickly subdued him. Even in custody, the man took full responsibility for everything, refusing to implicate anyone else. It was obvious to everyone that the real orchestrator was the organ company's manager, but without concrete evidence, she remained untouchable. Frustrated yet powerless, John had no choice but to let her walk free. A few days later, while patrolling the streets, John received an urgent new assignment. A man had just robbed the bank where he worked, brandishing a gun. Witnesses reported that he appeared to be strapped with explosives. Now, he was on the run and heading straight into John's patrol zone. John and Dorian immediately gave chase. However, due to an unexpected malfunction from the previous night, Dorian was running low on power, causing several of his functions to glitch, creating no small amount of trouble for John along the way. After a difficult pursuit, they finally apprehended the suspect. But upon closer inspection, John realized the man wasn't a ruthless criminal. He was being forced to commit the crime. A timed bomb was strapped to his neck. If they could disarm it, the crisis would be over. However, the situation was dire. The bomb's countdown showed only 46 seconds remaining, but Dorian, with its low power, estimated that disarming it would take at least 5 minutes. With no way to save the hostage, John could only act fast. He activated a protective shield to minimize the blast radius, bracing for what was about to come. Upon investigating the victim's car, authorities discovered that it was filled with surveillance cameras, indicating that the mastermind had been monitoring the man all along. Not long after, the police found a video circulating on the dark web, footage capturing the entire explosion incident. This was a blatant provocation. Analyzing the conversation in the video, John and his team quickly pinpointed the location where the mastermind had instructed the man to go. When they arrived, they found a strange-looking machine. Before John could figure out its purpose, lines of text suddenly appeared on its screen, followed by a photo of a young girl. Apparently, she was the next target. John immediately contacted the station, only to learn that a live broadcast had already started on the dark web. The girl in the photo had been forced to dance in a park in TikTok style, a timer bomb strapped around her neck. Wasting no time, John rushed to the scene. This time, he arrived with enough time to safely defuse the bomb. The girl was successfully rescued, but this act of defiance enraged the mastermind. He was now determined to take revenge on John. Meanwhile, the police had identified the man behind it all, Jack, a former police academy cadet specializing in explosives. He had been expelled due to failing psychological evaluations and had struggled to hold down a job ever since. Jack had once applied for a bank loan, but was denied by none other than the first victim. Later, Later, he had also confessed his love to the girl he just targeted, but after being rejected, he became consumed with hatred, kidnapping her and strapping a bomb to her. Believing Jack's next target would likely be the police academy instructor who expelled him, authorities placed the man under high protection. At the same time, they launched a raid on Jack's last known hideout, a motorhome. However, it was heavily rigged with explosives. Bomb disposal experts determined that dismantling the setup was impossible. Left with no other choice, the police detonated the vehicle remotely, but that left them with a new problem. Where would they find Jack now? Just as John was deep in thought, an officer approached him, claiming they had made a new discovery. Without hesitation, John followed him, only to realize too late that the officer was actually Jack in disguise. Caught off guard, John was knocked unconscious. When he woke up, he found himself in a public square with a bomb strapped around his neck. As with the previous incidents, Jack was live streaming everything on the dark web. The police quickly located John's position through the surroundings shown in the broadcast. It was in the park. They attempted to evacuate the area, but this time, the bomb wasn't just on a timer. Jack also held a detonator. Through the live stream, he warned that if anyone tried to clear the area or assist John in defusing the bomb, he would trigger it immediately. Then, using his phone, he instructed John that the defusal tools were hidden beneath a bench and that the show should begin. With each passing second, tension mounted. The watching officers, along with John himself, felt their hearts in their throats. Dorian, John's AI assistant, knew they couldn't just sit and wait. Since Jack had precise knowledge of their movements, he had to be observing from nearby. If they could locate and neutralize him, they could prevent further casualties. But when Dorian finally pinpointed Jack's position, he was stunned. The detonator was motion sensitive. If Jack let go, the bomb would immediately go off. This meant that sniping him from a distance wasn't an option. It seemed like there was no way out. John would have to dismantle the bomb himself, and that required trusting Jack to keep his word. Desperate, Dorian decided to take a gamble. He climbed the clock tower, planning to strike Jack with a high-voltage electric shock when the moment was right. It was a risky move, but it was their only chance. Meanwhile, Jack remained oblivious to the fact that he had been spotted. He was fully engrossed in his broadcast, exhilarated by the soaring viewership and praise from the audience. Then, he noticed something alarming. John was about to successfully defuse the bomb. Unwilling to let his sworn enemy walk away, he prepared to press the detonator. At that exact moment, Dorian reached the top of the clock tower and struck Jack with a powerful electric shock, knocking him unconscious. However, the effort drained Dorian's remaining power, causing him to shut down as well. With Jack incapacitated, there was no longer a risk of a manual detonation. John, in a final race against time, managed to defuse the bomb with just 2 seconds left. The crisis was over. A few days later, the police evidence room was suddenly attacked. Surveillance footage revealed a shocking twist. After being transported to the evidence room, a previously neutralized robot inexplicably came back to life. It retrieved a severed robot head from storage, eliminated the evidence room staff, and boldly walked out of the station. The incident sent shockwaves through the department, as the stolen robot head was the only remaining sample of the X-series model. These robots had been deemed highly unstable and excessively violent, leading to their complete eradication, except for this single preserved specimen. Hearing the details, John immediately recalled the previous break-in at the evidence room, where a criminal gang had attempted to steal the synthetic soul chip. The two incidents bore an uncanny resemblance. Could there be a deeper connection? For now, the top priority was recovering the missing robot head. After analyzing the reactivated robot's power system, the forensic expert concluded that it couldn't have traveled far. After all, the police had successfully taken it down once. If it had managed to come back online, it could only be running on a small backup battery. His theory proved correct. Just a short distance from the station, in a robotics warehouse, the X-series robot had used its last reserves of energy to install itself into a new body. At that moment, the warehouse owner, Booth, stumbled upon the scene. Surprisingly, there was no immediate confrontation. Booth seemed to recognize the X-series robot, though the machine didn't offer any explanations, it simply knocked him unconscious. When Booth awoke, he was surrounded by police officers. Dorian regarded Booth with a complex expression. After all, Booth was the original creator of both the D-series and X-series robots. Since his company's collapse, he had been making a living repairing robots. Seeing him again stirred deep emotions in Dorian. Booth, too, was overwhelmed at the sight of his own creations still in operation. But this was no time for nostalgia. John wasted no time asking Booth if he could locate the X-series robot. Booth confirmed that he could, but he needed his old lab equipment, most of which had been confiscated and locked away. John immediately took him back to the station. Upon seeing Booth, the forensic expert was awestruck. He practically worshipped him. Despite the X-Series robots' reputation for brutality, the synthetic soul technology they housed was a revolutionary achievement that no one but Booth had successfully developed. Just as they were discussing the matter, another urgent report came in. The escaped X-Series robot had just murdered a lab administrator and used his biometric data to access a robotics research facility. From there, it had stolen 500 specialized robot chips. If all 500 were used, it could mean the mass production of 500 X-Series robots, an unthinkable catastrophe. The police worked tirelessly to retrieve Booth's equipment. As he examined the familiar devices, a wave of emotions swept over him. Among the confiscated items was a case filled with test tubes, materials once used for synthetic souls. The irony wasn't lost on him. The very technology he had pioneered had now become his greatest regret. Just then, a man arrived at the station, introducing himself as a senior mechanical consultant. Due to the severity of the situation, higher authorities had assigned him to assist in the investigation. Back in the lab, Booth began working. Using synthetic soul technology, he managed to isolate a unique signal, the X-Series robot's proprietary communication frequency. By tracking this signal, they could pinpoint the robot's location. Additionally, Booth had developed an electronic pulse device capable of shutting down the X-Series model. However, there was a catch. It had to be inserted with precision into the back of the robot's head at close range. John was speechless. This was a near-suicidal task, but it was the only option, so he had no choice but to go through with it. Meanwhile, the X-Series robot was unaware that its location had been compromised. It drove toward an extravagant gala, preparing for a massacre. Authorities quickly cross-referenced the location and discovered that the event was a high-profile fundraiser hosted by a senator to gather campaign donations. If the X-Series robot went on a rampage there, the consequences would be catastrophic. John and his team mobilized at once. Nearly all available M-Series robots were dispatched to the scene. Even with this level of preparation, the Superior remained deeply concerned. After all, when the X-Series robots were initially decommissioned, each one had required the sacrifice of nearly 20 M-Series units to take down. Would they have enough firepower this time? At this point, John and the others had arrived at the party venue. Although the X-type robot had already begun its operation, it hadn't caused much damage yet. The police station's robots charged in, attempting to use sheer numbers to overwhelm the opponent. However, the disparity in power was too great, and before they even started, 5 of the police robots were destroyed. Seeing this, John had no choice but to send his partner Dorian to hold them off while he took advantage of the opponent's reload time to secretly insert an electronic pulse into the back of the X-type robot's head. But to his surprise, the robot wasn't affected at all. Moreover, the X-type, being an upgraded version of Dorian, was far more powerful. Within just a few moments, Dorian was completely overwhelmed. After taking down Dorian, the X-type robot's next target was John. If even Dorian couldn't stand a chance, John was no match either, and he was quickly overwhelmed. But just then, John suddenly revealed a grenade pin in his hand. The X-type robot, confused by the sudden move, was kicked away by John. Then a violent explosion completely destroyed the robot. It turned out that John had managed to pull the grenade pin from the robot's body, using the opportunity to turn the tide and eliminate the threat. John didn't take a break, but immediately informed the police that the electronic pulse provided by Booth had no effect. Upon hearing this, everyone rushed to find Booth for answers, only to discover that he had already vanished, taking with him a box of synthetic souls. The police quickly realized they had been deceived. Meanwhile, Booth had found the special chip that had gone missing from the lab in a nearby trash bin. With the synthetic souls in hand, he boarded the vehicle that had come to pick him up. In the driver's seat was another X-type robot. Everything had been part of Booth's plan from the start. He aimed to create a robot army and take revenge on those who had wronged him. After returning to the police station and learning of Booth's disappearance, John's first thought was to find him quickly. After all, the chip required some time to create a robot. During this period, if they searched various mechanical manufacturing factories, they could capture Booth. However, it was clear that Booth had anticipated this, so he didn't stay in the city. Instead, he headed to a place called the Isolation Wall to smuggle himself out. Upon hearing this, John thought Booth had lost his mind, but there was nothing he could do about it. The Booth incident was a heavy blow to the police, but they couldn't dwell on it for long, as new cases soon came up. Not long ago, a man had rushed into a subway station, seemingly being chased. However, the next moment, the man was shot dead by a bullet that came from an unknown source. John immediately headed to the scene. Upon investigation, he discovered 3 bullet traces at the site, with a bullet hole in the skylight. Strangely, there was only 1 bullet left at the scene, and no one in the subway station had heard a gunshot. The M-type robot then made its analysis, but John found its reasoning to be ridiculous and immediately shot it dead. However, he seemed to have forgotten that the robot was another officer's partner, leading to a confrontation that eventually reached their superior. But this was just a minor issue. Although the true cause of death remained unclear, the police decided to investigate the motive behind the crime. By tracking down the mastermind, they would be able to understand the method of the murder. John and Dorian investigated the deceased's background and discovered that his name was a programmer with no family, except for a fiancée. They met with the programmer's fiancée to ask if he had been acting strangely or had any conflicts with anyone recently. They did manage to obtain some useful information. According to her, the programmer had been developing a tracking program and was noticed by a headhunter named Natasha. They had made a deal not long ago. But since last night, the programmer had been extremely anxious. In their video calls, she could clearly tell he was terrified of something. Hearing this, John immediately became suspicious of Natasha. At this moment, the forensic expert from the police station called. After conducting the autopsy on the deceased, he discovered that the bullet was a special type, equipped with an air propulsion system that allowed it to change direction and accelerate. Combining this with the tracking program he had just heard about, John immediately had a hunch. After Dorian ran a test on the tracking program, they were certain that the special bullet had definitely been equipped with the program. This explained how it could accurately hit the programmer in the crowd, and why no one had heard a gunshot at the scene. Furthermore, the forensic expert discovered that the bullet had a suspicious origin. It had been stolen from a Russian terrorist organization not long ago. This suggested that the case might be an international terrorist attack, potentially sparking a diplomatic issue. However, that wasn't John's concern. What he needed to do was bring the mastermind to justice as soon as possible. John first investigated the woman named Natasha, but the name appeared to be fabricated. There was no record of her in any of the headhunter databases. The investigation hit a dead end, but then the criminals provided an opportunity. They were selling the special bullets on the dark web, and the promotional video showed the surveillance footage of the programmer's murder. One of the buyers was very interested, but to see the effectiveness of the bullet firsthand, Natasha agreed to meet with him. Their target was the programmer's fiancé, as Natasha wasn't sure if the woman had seen her face and preferred to eliminate her as a precaution. So a bullet was fired using a special device aimed at the programmer's fiancé. Coincidentally, John and his team were nearby, hoping to gather more information on Natasha. The programmer's fiancé mentioned that she had seen the woman before, but it was hard to describe her. However, she was certain she would recognize her if they crossed paths again. While this provided some useful leads, it wasn't the definitive evidence they needed. Just then, Dorian noticed something strange. Surveillance cameras around them seemed to be focusing on the programmer's fiancé. Having worked with tracking programs before, he was certain this was a sign of the woman being targeted. Sure enough, in the next moment, a bullet sped toward her. Dorian quickly reacted and shielded her from the shot, but in doing so, he sustained severe damage, and his speech center was destroyed, requiring temporary repairs. Natasha's assassination attempt had failed, and the buyer was deeply disappointed, stating that they needed to renegotiate the price. Natasha's resentment toward the programmer's fiancé grew, strengthening her resolve to eliminate her. On the other hand, John suspected this and immediately moved the key witness to a safe house, hoping to draw Natasha and her associates out. But just then, John learned from his colleagues that the programmer had opened a safe at the bank shortly before his death, and there might be crucial evidence inside. John rushed to the location and discovered a video. Upon watching it, he realized it was a threat letter. If the programmer didn't hand over the tracking program, they would kill his fiancée and child. It was through this threat letter that John and his team uncovered the real identity of the mastermind. As the police prepared to take further action, John learned that the programmer's fiancée had escaped from the safe house. He felt a wave of frustration, but had no choice but to search for her. Eventually, he found her at a shady clinic, where she was planning to have her memory erased. It turned out that after the attack, she believed the assailants were trying to erase her memory, so she wanted to remove her own memories to survive. John couldn't help but be dumbfounded by the logic. If she actually erased her memory, the mastermind would probably be laughing in his sleep. After managing to stop her from making a huge mistake, they were suddenly ambushed. Without warning, gunmen opened fire on John and his team, but fortunately, Dorian was there to help. In the end, the assailants were killed and one was captured. The captured person was Natasha. Ultimately, with the identification from the programmer's fiancé, Natasha was forced to confess and face justice. The programmer's case was just a small chapter in John's police career. Soon after, he found himself wrapped up in a new case. This time, the victim was an adult male. According to the coroner's report, the cause of death was sudden cardiac arrest. However, John's colleague Anna disagreed. She insisted that the man had been murdered because he was a cyborg. In this future world, many people undergo genetic modifications from the fetal stage to enhance various traits. The most noticeable features of such people were their excellent appearance, immunity to common diseases, and additional benefits like longer lifespans and higher intelligence. Anna herself was a cyborg and was very familiar with these traits, so she didn't accept the cardiac arrest conclusion. After inspecting the body, John and the team indeed found evidence of foul play. There was a very small needle mark on the back of the victim's neck. However, the results from Dorian's scan left everyone stunned. The victim had been killed by 7 different people. John immediately began investigating the 7 individuals identified by Dorian's scan, but what he discovered next was completely unexpected. All 7 of them had died recently, and in a very similar manner, sudden cardiac arrest. What's even more strange is that all of the victims were genetically modified people. Based on logic, it seemed likely that there was a flaw in the genetic modification technology, causing the modified individuals to die of heart failure. But the public narrative was different. People were saying that a twisted serial killer was targeting the modified humans. It seemed like a trick orchestrated by the genetic modification companies. But none of this mattered to John. The police had gathered the evidence of murder. John traced the victim's last movements and discovered that he had visited a particular club where he may have been targeted. However, when John tried to enter, Anna stopped him. It turned out that the club was for modified people, and while they didn't explicitly ban ordinary humans, the modified people considered themselves superior and showed obvious disdain for non-modified individuals. If John went in, he wouldn't get the answers he was looking for and could potentially cause a conflict. Even Anna, a modified person herself, was ridiculed by the people inside because of her status as a police officer. To them, only those in high-end industries were worthy of their respect. Anna, suppressing her anger, obtained the victim's file from the club, and sure enough, she found a lead on the killer. However, the facial recognition software in the surveillance footage showed some unusual results. She immediately informed John, who was listening to the forensic expert's latest report. The expert had found that all 7 victims had similar needle marks on their necks and had nanorobots implanted in their brains. John immediately recognized these were cosmetic robots. These robots could extract a person's facial features and transfer them to another individual. But this research had long been discontinued. Just then, Anna sent more information. Surveillance cameras had identified the killer as different people in separate recordings, and each of them was one of the previously dead victims. This confirmed what the forensic expert had said. Now, finding the organization that had worked with this cosmetic technology would reveal the identity of the criminal. John quickly went to a cosmetic clinic where the medical doctor had been one of the researchers on the project. After questioning him, John learned the truth behind the project's termination. The nanorobots could indeed extract a person's facial features, but it caused severe harm to the person undergoing the procedure. The modified people all suffered facial disfigurement, and those whose features were extracted experienced severe heart problems. Some had arrhythmias, while others' hearts stopped entirely. As a result, the project had to be shut down. The doctor also revealed that these nanorobots required a special device to function and suggested that John investigate that route. Since these devices were strictly controlled in legitimate hospitals, John immediately ruled that out and turned to his informant in the black market. He learned that a nearby underground clinic had the device, so he headed straight there. The doctor had just finished an operation for the killer, and the computer records weren't processed yet when John and his team arrived. When the doctor saw them, he immediately injected himself with a mysterious substance and prepared to fight. However, he was quickly subdued by John and Dorian. It seemed that the drug had been too much for him, as he died on the spot. After scanning the body, Dorian confirmed that the doctor had also been involved in the cosmetic project and had stored information on the killer's next target and the mastermind's true identity on his computer. John contacted Anna to protect the target while he and Dorian rushed to the killer's location. At that moment, the killer was preparing to continue his crimes, but upon seeing the police downstairs, realized he was exposed. He quickly abandoned his plan and returned home. However, he didn't flee. Instead, he sat staring at his computer. After some time, he seemed to make a decision and boldly went to the building across the street. By the time John and the team arrived, the killer had already knocked on the door of a nearby apartment. But instead of killing the girl like before, he confessed his love to her. It turned out that the man had met the girl from the opposite building online and had fallen deeply in love with her. However, due to an accident during the project he had been involved in, he was disfigured, which made him extremely self-conscious and eventually led him down the dark path of collecting genes from handsome men and beautiful women to modify himself. But fate had a cruel twist. The woman he had fallen in love with online was actually blind. The killer was filled with sorrow and regret. As he stood on the rooftop, watching John and his team arrive, he suddenly jumped, leaving only one final statement that they all have the right to be loved. With that, the drama comes to an end.